What's next for transportation energy? On today's episode, a conversation about the future of autonomous vehicles with Transportation Energy Institute's Executive Director John Eichberger, TEI's Vice President Jeff Hovey, and Carl Dunges, Executive Director of TEI's Charging Analytics Program.
All right, guys. So recently there's been some more news, consistently it seems, on autonomous technology. There was an article real recently that I saw that talked about autonomous trucks running down the highways in Texas in the middle of the night with no drivers and running the defined routes and stuff. You know, Carl and I have debated for, 2 years now whether autonomous technology is actually going to take off. He thinks it's tomorrow. I think it's probably when my great-grandchildren finally start driving that we'll see autonomous vehicles as a regular thing. That being said, I still believe that the first application of autonomous technology, like fully autonomous, straight line, interstate highways, cargo trucks, middle of the night, no conflict, very few other drivers, very few obstacles to navigate, and you get from point A to point B, pick up a driver for the last miles. Because you think about it, we are short drivers as it is, and that technology will improve the efficiency of our distribution system as well as address the driver shortage. So, from my perspective, I think autonomous trucks is a no-brainer, just a question of when it's going to actually hit the market and be well represented on the streets. What do you guys think?
There's no question, and I would take it a step further. It's more than just a no-brainer. It's a complete and total disruption. It would change the supply chain, the logistics, the cost of everyday goods. And it's not a very sexy topic, but it is an unbelievably fundamental and profound change in how logistics, supply chains, and the cost of everyday products would be factored in. Because if you look at this, what you describe, and I don't think people understand, it's not just a truck driving down the highway at night with no driver. It's a platoon of trucks.
Right.
It's almost like a virtual train. And when you start looking at the economics of trailing 1, 2, 3, or 4 or more cargo trucks all falling down autonomously together in a unison, the economics of shipping are just transformed. It's a really big deal. And as you say, it's being done today in supervised and in test and beta situations. This is not pie in the sky stuff.
Well, if you think about it, if you're a NASCAR fan or a cycling fan, you're talking about drafting. Yes. And if all the vehicles are autonomous and communicating with one another, you can narrow that follow gap pretty tight and improve the fuel efficiency of the vehicles behind the lead vehicle of like 30%. I'm sorry, Jeff, I cut you off, but that efficiency gain is so critical to what we're trying to achieve here.
And I think the efficiencies on that, as well as efficiencies with removing the cost of the driver, like you said, John. We've had driver shortages now for years. The other cost that comes up, and we talked about it earlier on autonomous vehicles, and that is, how are the insurance companies chiming in on this technology?
Right.
Are they statistically saying that there are going to be less risks because of autonomy? Or, early on, that was kind of the vibe I was getting, that it was almost preferred to take the human element out of it. Now, I'm not sure if that's still true or not. I haven't heard anything more recently. This was probably a couple of years ago that this was a big touch point.
I want to follow up on that. It's not the exact same situation, but Tesla does offer its own insurance, and they actually give you a lower rate if you use their autonomy than if you drive yourself. So I know it's not the exact same example, but you're seeing it in personal vehicles. The insurance does go down, at least for the test case of Tesla, if you use their autonomy package, their full self-driving, supervised full self-driving, instead of driving yourself. And so the theory holds out, at least in that use case.
I think where my pessimism and all this has come from is back in like 2017 or so, we had a big report come out from RethinkX. We had Bob Lutz, former vice chairman of General Motors, saying that within 10 to 20 years, we won't be driving personal vehicles anymore. Everything will be autonomous, electric, on-demand service providers. And I laughed then at just the unbelievable aggressiveness of this forecast. And now here we are 8 years later, we're still talking about the infancy of the technology. We had a speaker from Argonne speak at our conference several years ago, and she came in and said, look, we are studying this closely to figure out what the energy value would be of autonomy, but the complications, the hurdles we have to overcome are unbelievably numerous. And so you hear people come out and say, yeah, in 10, 15 years, this is all going to happen. I just laugh because they're not paying attention, Jeff, to your point. Insurance, regulations, the kid chasing a ball out in the middle of the street, a dog running across. They're not factoring in all of these external inputs that can compromise the effectiveness and safety of an autonomous vehicle. Now, we can, I believe, overcome all of that, but it's going to take a long time, which is why, Carl, when you and I debate, I'm like, autonomous, ooh, great, it's all, pie in the sky stuff. Ultimately, there's applications for it. We're getting there. It's just taking time. I just think this article I read last week really kind of raised it back to the forefront of my mind as this is closer, at least in a commercial space, than I would have originally thought. And so we at TEI, we're always looking at what are the challenges to success. And when those challenges start numbering in the dozens, it becomes kind of daunting to really think that's going to be successful anytime soon.
Well, when people look at it and they try to project out how long is this going to take, what I've heard people explain, and this is something I'm just now hearing, and it's very interesting because I'm hearing it from all the major players, or at least the staff from Waymo, staff from Tesla, staff from Zoox and the others, and they're saying it's not an equation of time to figure this out. They're saying that people used to say, okay, what are your algorithms? The AI, brain that's trying to figure this out. Have you programmed it right? And the visual inputs and the labeling. And they're saying they've ditched all that, and they're saying it's not human intervention that will solve this. It's raw, brute amount of compute, and the amount of chips and data centers that you have to deploy, and the amount of energy it takes to run all that. It's just they're going to throw massive volumes of compute at this problem. And so the question is, how much compute and how much energy does it require? And the cost, that upfront cost of deploying all those chips and server farms is astronomical. And so the gatekeeping issue is the volume of compute to just let the AI engine figure this out on its own. It's a lot. It's a lot more than people realize, and it's expensive as hell. And so, when you look at it from that term, it's really about how advanced are the chips? How many can you deploy? Can you get enough energy to run enough data centers to do this, and then go repeat this in every area you want to do this? You do it in China, in Europe. It is a lot to train all this, and so it's a heavy lift to get past all those corner cases you just described.
So I got one question. One thing that hit the media a couple of months ago was the difference between radar and LiDAR. And they were seeing completely different results. LiDAR in this particular article was much superior as far as recognizing those other aspects that John mentioned, as far as the kid running out or the animal running out, whatever. Do we have any more experience on? It seems like LiDAR is more of an EU discussion as opposed to what's being discussed by Tesla, or is Tesla starting to employ that as well?
No, and you got visual cameras, and then that try to mimic a human being. And the theory is everything on the road that we've done for the last 100 years is designed for two eyes and a neural net, your brain processing vision coming in and reacting to it. And so instead of trying to change the way that the street and the signs and the whole architecture and system architecture of our driving ecosystem works, they try to create something that fits right into that. That's the Tesla approach: visual with a neural net that processes the visual cues. Waymo has taken a different approach, and so have some of the others. And the Chinese have done a mix as well. And they've done a combination of visual and LiDAR. And that's how Tesla started. And they ditched it because the ability to take two different inputs, visual and then LiDAR radar, and combine those two and have a neural net, a brain, process them, it wasn't working. And so they just went back to just getting rid of the LiDAR, and that's how they've moved. And it's a much more difficult thing to accomplish, but it's a much more scalable solution because it doesn't have to be geofenced, it doesn't have to be mapped, it just reacts to the real world. I'm hearing rumors that Waymo may go back and rethink the way they're doing it, but that's just rumors. We have a situation in China though where I can't remember which, I think it was Baidu, but I'm not sure on this. That started off going down the visual and LiDAR route, and they just recently ditched it, and they're going to do what Tesla has done. And you've seen several other people, and this is all in the last month, who've said they really think that the Tesla approach, while it's more difficult up front, is the approach that will work and will in the day work properly, and that pre-mapping and everything that you have to do with LiDAR won't work because every time there's a slight change in the roads or the system, you have to remap the whole architecture, and it's not scalable because of all the mapping that has to be done versus a system that can go anywhere and just react to the real world. So, who wins? We shall see. I know my personal opinion is I do believe that the visual approach that Tesla's going is going to win the day, but that's speculation. We shall see.
So what do you guys think? I mean, like I said, my belief is the first mover is going to be commercial, where you reduce the interference of external factors going down the road. Yet, I know, Carl, you and I talk a lot about the autonomous taxis being deployed in certain cities, and there's only a couple 100,000 of them. So it's not like we're looking at millions of vehicles, but we're starting to get some momentum. We're starting to see more adoption, more utilization, more reporters actually using them and trying to learn and explain what the experience is like. Let's assume we can solve all the technology issues. The motivation has always been reduce highway fatalities, improve energy consumption. To your point, Carl, the amount of compute power required to support this technology, will that negate the energy gains and efficiency of an autonomous operation? There was a company called Too Simple out of San Diego who had an autonomous truck, and they basically had a driver watching it, but what they found was that autonomous vehicle running a defined route would reduce fuel consumption of about 10%. We talked about platooning and the drafting. There was also a study that Navigant Research shared with me, now Guidehouse, years ago, that looked at the impact of autonomous technology on miles traveled. If we put it in passenger vehicles, your tolerance for commuting would increase because now you're productive on your commute. So we could see city population spread out and start commuting further if they don't have to drive. That there increases energy consumption. So, net, I don't know what the balance is here, but it's something we need to be paying attention to and thinking about.
You bring up a really important point that everyone skips over. Anytime in the arc of human history and since the industrial age, anytime we've made something cheaper and more efficient, people never say, great, now we've got all these efficiency gains.
Right.
Oh, hell no. They say, give me more. I can afford more now. And so that is human nature. That is human nature. They will absolutely do that. And you're 100% correct. But I will say this, to your point about it does reduce strain. So I have a Tesla Model Y that now 2 years in a row, I've driven from Austin, Texas, all the way down to Southwest Florida in the Fort Myers, Naples area. And before when I had an internal combustion engine, I could go maybe 3 hours max for a stint and maybe 8 hours in a day, and my hip would hurt, my neck would hurt, my shoulder would hurt. I was exhausted, and just get me the hell out of this car. And it would take me 3 days, 2.5 days to do it. As soon as I started using the Tesla full self-driving system, I was able to go, I think, 14 hours the first day without any aches and pains. And mind you, the downside is I had to stop a little more often and charge, and charging took 30 minutes, which forced me to get out and walk around. But I could drive so much longer with no strain. It was so much easier. I can't even express how much less fatigue there is on the body and the brain when you're not having to actually control the wheel and pay exact attention, even though you are supposed to be supervising, which of course I did. And so, but it's real. It is 100% real when you, and it's not, this is not just a Tesla thing. It's more limited in the other brands, but Mercedes has a version, Ford has a version, GM has a version where you can at least go on the highway, and theirs are hands-free. It doesn't matter which car you do it in. it reduces strain, and I don't think people appreciate just how much strain it reduces and how much easier it makes a commute. And then you're starting to talk, and John, you and I have had this conversation, what happens to regional commuting flights? For that's something that's a 3-hour drive or less, that's where you really start to shake up the economics and disrupt things.
Jeff, you live out there in rural heartland of America. So we published a book about 8 years ago called Urbanization. And basically it was a historical trend analysis of where people live relative to their transportation. What we found was, going back more than 100 years, the distance a person could travel in an hour seemed to dictate how far away from their workplace, their shopping they could live. So horse and buggy, however many miles it was, that's how far. Get the horseless buggy, you expanded. As we started increasing the speed and reliability of transportation, city centers and city populations spread. And what you just said, if I can now sit in a car for 2 hours to get to my office, and I can work on the way and I'm not tired when I get there, then I can afford a nicer place 2 hours away rather than having to live 45 minutes from the office. That is a big deal. That hits on energy consumption, efficiency, emissions, everything. And so while this may be a great technology in a variety of perspectives, there are, as always, trade-offs that we need to better understand, especially when it comes to our energy needs, because we're facing a energy situation where our demand is going to outstrip capacity pretty quickly. Yes. If we don't dramatically boost energy production. I'm not talking about fuel, I'm talking electricity here. Most autonomous vehicles are going to be powered by electric powertrains, but even if not, the autonomous computing power is going to be powered by electricity. And we have a serious situation here that we need to be paying attention to. So again, that's one of the things TEI does, Jeff, Carl, since day one is, okay, that idea sounds great. Let's peel the onion to see what's really in there and see how many layers we need to dissect and figure out and solve before it becomes an actual solution that fits the needs of the traveling public.
You bring up some really important points, and this is what, like you said, this is what TEI does, peeling back those layers. It's an onion you got to get down. And when it comes to autonomy, you've got two different sides of the equation on energy consumption and how this will be rolled out. You've got to train the AI engine, and that's where your data center comes in. That is unbelievably energy intense to train these models, and it takes a lot. And then you have something called inference compute, and that's the actual use of the trained system that's been implanted into the vehicle, and then inference compute actually uses those rules and regulations or models and then reacts to the real world. And that takes a little less, but it takes a very powerful chip. And you only see that GPU, that powerful GPU, placed in electric vehicles that can have that capability to process the real world and enable that autonomous driving to occur. And so you have to ask yourself, are electric vehicles the real disruption here? And is that what's really going to cause the changeover? Is it the drivetrain, or is it the system architecture of that drivetrain that enables artificial intelligence bots and agents to be in your car, which, a lot of the Tesla now has the Grok system. And then on top of that, it has autonomy. Is it all these AI enabled services and capabilities that are on that system architecture that will push electric vehicles? And, are we looking at this right? But what are the ramifications of all this thing? Because now the other thing that we study is driver behavior changes when you're in an autonomous vehicle. Charging and fueling behavior changes when you're in an autonomous vehicle. And then if you move over into the robo-taxi or ride-hailing that's done on an autonomous platform, that changes driver and retail behavior even more, because there's no one grabbing the wheel and veering over to a price sign that's got cheap electricity or cheap gas or taking on a discount. Everything is done through that monitor and through the app. And so the people that have charging equipment, the people that want to sell food and convenience items and all these other things, everyone has to rethink the way they interact with the driver, and they have to relearn what are the cultural and the habits of driving and charging, and how do I make that work into my business model? Everything has to be relooked at. It's all going to change.
No, I think just the potential for sheer infrastructure demands, right? I mean, if in-road wireless charging, it plays a role, that's a huge infrastructure build out, but those that do it are going to be communities that may be better served, right? So but then again, who can afford that? Who's gonna install that if we're talking about electric autonomous vehicles? And then that appears to solve a lot of the problems as far as having to do the frequency of stops, how disruptive is it? But getting from point A to point B, to John's point and to your point, Carl, it could potentially be very, very easy coming up and allow for all that to happen. I mean, we know all this technology exists today. It's when is it going to roll out? Who's going to build out that infrastructure? Are there ancillary benefits? Are there ancillary, detractors? What are the pros and cons of each one of those? And how do we make sure we don't get over our skis too far?
And what you mentioned is actually not very pie in the sky. I lived in Germany twice, once in the 70s, I just dated myself, and then once again in the late 80s, mid 80s. And the public buses over there, a lot of them had like little accordions on the roof that would push up against electric wires. And they were not diesel or gasoline-driven transit buses. They were electric drivetrain. And the concept you're talking about is instead of having it overhead, you're having it underneath, and it's inductive. And the Tesla Robotaxi prototype, which they have yet to deploy, and also the Tesla Cybertruck, both of them very quietly have inductive charging built into them. And so this technology is very real. It's very there. It hasn't been deployed widely, but it is very real and it's very there. And the concept of running like a transit bus on electricity via the overhead wires has been done since a very long time. So these are not pie in the sky, ideas. They're very real.
Clearly, there's a lot to dissect here, and I think we got time to do it. TEI has not done a whole lot of work in the autonomous space, but as it starts gaining some market viability, I think we're going to need to pay attention, because how it relates to our energy supply and energy delivery system is going to be absolutely essential. And so we'll be looking at this quite some time. Our board meeting coming up in the fall of 25, we'll put this on the agenda to discuss where we need to be focusing our attention and how we can contribute to the knowledge base so that as this technology continues to develop, it hits the market in a way that is beneficial both for the environment, energy demand, consumers, and public safety. So there's a lot here to dive into, and I think we just started scratching the surface today.
Yeah.
What's Next for Transportation Energy is a production of the Transportation Energy Institute. Find out more about us at transportationenergy.org.